6:30, and I would like to call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. If you would stand with me for the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Roll call, please.
Mr. Booker.
Here.
Mr. Herrera.
Here.
Mrs. Haupt. Here. Ms. Mayville.
Here.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Here.
Mr. Zicker.
Before we start the special meeting of the board, as a reminder, our approved meeting norms and board protocol are provided for a reminder and reference. So first item on the agenda is the hearing of visitors. At this time, members of the public and employees of District 100 may make public comments. As a reminder, any person appearing before the board is expected to address the board only at the appropriate time and follow the directives of the board president to maintain order and decorum, identify oneself, limit comments to 3 minutes, and conduct oneself with respect and civility toward others, and otherwise abide by board policy 8:30, visitors to and conduct on school property. We have one person signed up to speak tonight, Mayor Clinton Morris.
I almost feel like I should turn this podium around. I got my back to a crowd too, don't I? Anyhow, thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Clint Morris, Mayor of the City of Belvedere. I know the last time that we had some conversations was regarding Perry School. And one of the things that I wanted to bring attention to the board, but also to the people that are behind me and to the public, I wanted to mention that the City of Belvedere, since 1995, has collected impact fees. And in 1995, the City of Belvedere imposed impact fees because education was going to be teaching classes out of trailers. They didn't have any of the new developments that we've had since then. And definitely, we had a problem. We had tremendous growth, 2005, 6, 7, 2008 hit, and then everything changed. And I think those who've been here a while understand that. But one of the things that former Mayor Peterson did, and I happened to be on the council then, was he had looked at what some of the communities that were along the I-90 growth corridor to the east of us, they had faced tremendous growth, and they had a problem with education, how with their tremendous growth, they were not able to keep up with the demands for schools. And of course, I don't have to tell you this, or the public, but the price for a new school is very, very expensive. And so one of the ways that the communities were helping school districts, and that's what we did, we charged an impact fee for new development, but only went to the school district. It never went to the city. It didn't go to the conservation district, didn't go to the park district. It went to schools, education. Of course, 68% of our property tax goes towards education here. So, with that being said, all the new development was marketing their homes on all the strengths of Belvedere, but they were bringing a burden with them because we have to educate children, we have to provide public safety, we have parks and recs, but then it was predominantly we were worried, how were we going to educate and how could we contribute to education and help District 100? So we did pass an impact fee ordinance, and we collected and always have collected money since 1995 for education in Belvedere. I've always felt that a lot of the individuals that develop in our community, they don't live here. They don't live in Belvedere, they live somewhere else. And since I've been in office, I realize that more now than ever. You have individuals, I've had individuals from Bartlett, Chicago, Peoria. Now I want them to do business here, but I also want to make sure that we look out as,
You can have a couple more minutes.
okay, that we look out as city leaders and government leaders for the taxing districts. So since then, impact fees have evolved. There are charges for just more than the school district. But I also was well aware that Perry School, and I know you guys have talked about this and you have come to a consensus about keeping Perry School as a neighborhood school. When I had come to the meeting at the library, I had asked the question, I had posed the question that we have impact fees that the city has collected. The county has given up on impact fees. They put a moratorium on it, and I think it's wrong. But from the city's perspective, we continue to charge new growth for the burden they put on our services, education being the most expensive and most important. So, with Perry School being a topic of discussion, I had brought up impact fees, and I think I may have not explained impact fees, but they do go towards education. They have been here since 1995, and to me, it's unconscionable if we don't keep them in place. So with that being said, I had realized that Perry had not had any capital investment, very little anyhow, had very little operating and maintenance put into Perry School. In my opinion, I hadn't been through Perry School since 1970. Whenever this discussion came up, I had called Superintendent Shug, and I had asked her if I could go through it. And it was kind of a nostalgic, kind of fun. But it was also a wake-up to me, because I have to tell you, the Perry School looked like it did back in 1970. So I had brought up the impact fee, and I had pointed out that the city had collected, and only the government, only governments, the county and the city, only we can collect on behalf of the taxing districts, taxing bodies. And I'm committed to continue to do that. I think it's important. And so I've come up here tonight because Joanne, where's Joanne? Hi, Joanne.
Hello.
But we had chatted about some of the funding, and at the time, I knew it was going to be several $100,000. But actually, it's a check for $520,728.82. And so that's the city's portion of doing our share to make sure that the burden of growth pays for itself, especially for education. So I also want to add, I think the moratorium is a big mistake. I know that there are some factors that went along with that with the county, and I understand that, but I do believe that it impacts the taxpayer, the hardworking taxpayer here. If we don't collect these impact fees on growth, that burden, that cost gets passed on to all of us that live here and utilize the schools. And that's why I believe they're important. But I want to thank you for allowing me to speak. But I also want to give you this check. And I hope that Perry School receives some of this funding, because as I had said, I went through Perry and I was very, very dismayed at the condition of the school. So I'll give this to you, Superintendent.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Mayor.
I know it won't bounce.
I'm very glad to hear it.
Thank you.
You bet. You take care.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Do we know what the impact fees would have been had the county collected them, what that number would be approximately?
Maybe we can find out.
I would be interested to know that.
The moratorium went into place, I think, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was partially with COVID and.
Yeah,
and
it was 3 or 4
taking
years
it.
ago.
Well, I just remember this was a big thing when we all ran. And
What
people
was?
Well, the impact fee subject, and I really knew very little about it at the time.
Yeah, the moratorium's been in place, I think, 3 or 4
Yeah,
years
since
with the
probably
county.
right around then. And I'm just curious to
It was
know,
part of COVID.
if this was
relief.
520,000, what would that have been had they kept collecting?
Yeah, not a huge amount, because growth was pretty small at that point, but we can find out.
That check is for the last 3 years. That check represents since 2021.
Oh, that's 3 years?
For the city of Oak.
That's just in the city of Belvedere.
Correct.
Yeah.
More than I thought.
Alrighty, thank you. Moving along, master facilities discussion. Who's leading this tonight?
Well, we have, oh,
Oh,
What?
okay, sure. Yes, come on up, Melissa.
Sorry.
You're good.
Okay, so you guys all know me, my name's Melissa Williams. I just wanted to stand up quick and say that at the last meeting that I was at, I was super heartbroken to see that Perry got no maintenance approval over the summer. And then we were told that, oh, well, it's because we don't know what's gonna happen, if we're gonna build a new one, or if we're gonna fix this one up. But this year, there are 200 students there. This year, right now, there are 200 kids there who should be in good things and having regular upkeep and maintenance. So I just don't understand who makes the decisions to say that we shouldn't spend $1,000 to dig drainage tile underneath of the playground so that the mulch doesn't fly away every time it rains. Like, why is that not okay? Like, where's the limit at that? I just feel like, yes, decisions need to be made. We need to decide if we're gonna add on, if we're gonna build a new. But kids are there this year and those kids matter and we need to put the maintenance into the building while the kids are there. So,
Thank you, Melissa. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? All right, master facilities discussion.
all right. We have two guests with us here this evening, and I'm actually gonna turn it over to Mrs. Armstrong to introduce them.
So as we have talked quite extensively about the master plan, today we have with us Bob Lewis from PMA, who's our municipal advisor, and Ann Noble from Steeple, who has talked with you previously, gave you that very high level overview. Today they're here to talk a little more in depth and kind of give you, now that we have presented kind of the tiers and the plan, what possible options there are and the impact that those options would have on our community, on our budgets, and how we do our taxes. So with that, I will, and now the presentation is on board docs, but we also give you a hard copy in case you want to take notes and ask lots of questions. They're automatically on.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for having us here tonight. So we'll recap some of the stuff that you've already discussed before. It's always good to have a refresher on the rules. Actually, since the last time we got a presentation, some of the law that deals with how schools go about borrowing has changed for the good, we believe. And then Ann and I and our colleagues put together a sample plan of finance. You know, at this point, it's not a recommendation or anything like that. It's just a starting point for your consideration and review that can be altered and adjusted as more information comes in.
And I definitely want to emphasize that there are 20 different ways we could have shown you this plan. Probably there's more. We just started with an approach, and you could come back and say, well, what if we delay and do this, or what if we need 5 million more, or what if we want to borrow for a shorter period of time? I mean, there's all different variables that will ripple through this. So please just take this as an example to show you what you can accomplish and what it would cost with these assumptions, and know that we can tweak it any which way you want.
So let's go ahead and begin on slide 3. And slide 3 again is your legal debt margin. And the analogy that we oftentimes use is, think of the legal debt margin as the limit on the amount of principal you can have outstanding. So it's like what we as individuals as our credit card limit. You know, limits the amount of principal that you can have on your credit card. And it's a dynamic calculation. It changes over time as you pay down principal or add principal, or as EAV changes. Because you're a unit district, so it's 13.8% of your equalized assessed value. And if you look at the first column of numbers, levy year 23, the EAV was 1.1 billion, and that is multiplied by 13.8%, you get 158 million. Subtract the amount of principal outstanding, that's where you come up with the 104 million, which I think you've seen before. But as time moves on, just as you pay down principal and as EAV grows, that number will get larger. So next year it might be as high as 114, and the year after that 124, And that's just using a flat EAV, so if EAV grows, that number will continue to grow. You know, in Illinois, there's a lot of exemptions to that calculation anyhow, so it's not as constraining as it would be for us as individuals. There's no exemptions for us, right? So, but for schools, there are exemptions that we utilize from time to time when putting together a plan of finance. The next slide is a graphical representation of your debt service payments. So it's a combination of your principal and interest. And levy year 23 is the current year's payments, which you're collecting taxes right now to make those. And then you have 5 more years remaining after that. The gray portion is what we estimate you'll levy for. The peach portion is what we estimate you will be paying from the sales tax that you collect. And the green line represents an estimate of the bond and interest tax rate. And that, if EAV grows, because you have a relatively flat bond payment, if EAV grows, then that rate that you pay towards bonds, the bonds will go down over time, which it has done the last few years. So it's with this picture that you have 5 years remaining is what gives you the opportunity now to start considering plans of finance to address the capital needs that have been identified. So slide 6 in the next section, this is where we talk about the new legislation. Before we talk about the new legislation, we do need to review a concept called the debt service extension base, or DSEB. And that comes from the tax cap law. But much of what we talk about comes from the school code, a little bit from the Local Government Debt Reform Act. But the DSEB is a tax cap concept. And it not only applies to school districts, it applies to park districts and community colleges that are in tax cap counties. And it is set to equal whatever you were levying for in the year tax caps applied to Boone County, which is, I think, 97, give or take a year. And in that year, you were levying $1.7 million to pay the principal and interest that was due that year on non-referendum bonds only. Your referendum bond payments didn't count towards that. About 15 years ago, it was tied to the Consumer Price Index, so that limit has now increased to $2.4 million. And the next slide gives you a graphical representation of this. And you have the red line there, which represents the currently known DSEB. There's a little bit of slope at the beginning, that's reflecting the CPI increase that we're aware of from last January. The dashed line represents what this constraint could be over time if CPI were to average 1.5%. And normally, for most of the school districts we work with, there'll be some blue columns underneath here because they would have some outstanding non-referendum bonds that were subject to this DSEB. You currently have no non-referendum bonds, so you have no blue columns there, so it's totally unencumbered. Since tax caps went into existence, you've only done one non-referendum financing. It was for a small life safety bond that matured maybe 4 or 5 years ago, so you haven't had any non-referendum debt for quite some time.
So what this represents is you have about $2.4 million of annual bond payments a year that you could encumber on non-voter approved bonds. And we'll talk about the different kinds of non-voter approved bonds, but this is available capacity to you to make an annual payment. That's what the DSEB represents, is the annual principal and interest cap on non-voter approved bonds. Okay?
So as just piggyback one more comment on that, as the interest, this is just like your home mortgage payment, right? You determine what you want for your monthly home mortgage payment, interest rates go up, the amount you can buy for a home go down. Because you got it, whatever that payment is, you have to pay principal and interest. It's the same thing with this. If interest rates are higher, your ability to borrow goes down. If interest rates are lower, the ability to borrow goes up. And so we covered that now, even though it's an existing concept, because some of the legislative changes affect which bonds are constrained by the DSEB. Prior to these legislative changes, school districts, all 4 types of non-referendum bonds that school districts can do, all of them were constrained by the DSEB, okay? Now let's go over these legislative changes, and we'll tell you one bond that no longer is constrained by that, which is something that's beneficial to this plan of finance. So the plan of finance we have a little bit later on could not have been done prior to this legislation. So first is that bonds and debt certificates for capital projects can now be issued to a maximum of 30 years. It used to be 20 years. Doesn't mean that you should necessarily utilize all that authority, but it's nice to have it available, because sometimes you have plans where you need to go out 23 years or 24 years, and now you have the ability to do things like that. If interest rates are lower, it makes sense to go out further, but that's something that could be beneficial to the plan of finance. Voter approval is no longer required for the purchase or construction of a new building, as long as you can certify that pre-K or K space is increased. So some confusion on this has been, or two things, there's been 2 points of confusion. It doesn't mean you have to build a pre-K or K building. You just have to certify that pre-K or K space increase. So for example, if you build a grade center that was 4 through 6 only, you could still certify that some other existing building can now handle more kindergarten pre-K. You can take advantage of that and not have to go to referendum to build or acquire that building. The other point of confusion is, when this first came out, people thought that there was ability to go out and just issue bonds and fund it. And that's not the case. There's no funding that's tied to this. What it's useful for is situations where the school district already has the resources to build the new building without going to referendum. And an example, and it's an extreme example, but these do happen, is Cicero 99, about 10 years ago, had the fund balance to build a new elementary building. But they went to the voters and got permission to just build the building. They didn't ask for any debt or anything. The voters approved it, and then they could spend their fund balance to build a new building. If they were a park district or a city or a county, none of them had that requirement. It was just school districts that had it. And another example is if you have the ability to issue a non-referendum bond to pay for a new building or buy a new building. I was just talking to somebody on the phone that's looking to buy a vacant Walmart store for doing things like that. Well, now there's new legislation, they can buy that Walmart store. So it's useful to have this available now for those types of situations. The third change, and it doesn't really impact your plan of finance, but it's useful for a lot of school districts, is that referendum bonds that are approved in November 5th or after no longer count against the debt limit as long as the school district conducts a hearing and publishes certain information about taking advantage of this exemption. And the reason for this is that many school districts every year have to go, they'll get a referendum bond approved, and let's say, for example, it's $50 million and their legal debt limit calculation was $35 million. They legally couldn't sell the bonds that the voters just approved because that calculation was only $35 million. So they go to the General Assembly and get permission in the school code for them specifically to be able to sell the bonds and not have to apply them to their debt limit. And if you go to the school code, there's like pages and pages and pages of these exemptions. So the General Assembly finally decided it's sort of silly to do this every year because they're always giving approval. Now they just make it available for everybody as long as the voters approve it and you conduct the hearing and do a publication. And the fourth one is the biggest and most valuable potentially to a plan of finance for you. It's incorporated into the sample that Ann and I are going to walk you through here in a moment. Is that life safety bonds, which are one type of non-referendum bond that schools can do, no longer are constrained by the debt service extension base. So the reason why the General Assembly considered this and ultimately approved it was that under the school code, all school districts have to do a life safety survey every 10 years. And if you're a non-capped school district, they could just go out and sell life safety bonds and amortize the payments however they wanted to fit whatever constraints that they wanted to do in terms of the tax burden that would create. If you're in a tax cap county, you had to hope you had a debt service extension base and also hope that you hadn't used it for something else. And there's many school districts in tax cap counties that have no DSEB. Indian Prairie is probably the biggest and the poster child. 35 school buildings and no DSEB. And all those new buildings they built are now coming up needing these improvements. So essentially the case was made for a lot of school districts, the life safety survey is an unfunded mandate. They would either have to dip in the fund balance or go to referendum to do the things that the state has told them to do. And now, by granting this exception, the General Assembly hasn't granted a blank check for you to go out and sell $200 million of life safety bonds if you wanted to. Because ultimately, ISB has to sign off on what they think is life safety. So if you get a $10 million life safety approval, you can sell up to $10 million of life safety bonds. You can't sell 15. So there is a limit then on how much that ultimately a school district can sell. So given those two points, they were sensitive to this argument and get granted this exception. So school districts have 4 different types of non-referendum bonds you can do. 2 of them we're not going to talk about because they're very seldom utilized. That's a tort bond and a funding bond. So we're not going to talk about them the rest of the presentation. The other 2 that really apply in most circumstances are working cash bonds, which are still subject to the DSEB, and life safety bonds, which aren't. So with that, we go into the new money analysis. And the summary of the facility needs is on the top of the page here. This is provided by Mrs. Armstrong, which I believe came from your architect. And so the total amount, it's the last time you did this analysis was from last fall, maybe October, somewhere on there, September, October, was $110 million. So we use that as a starting point to try to put together a plan that would get you $110 million, not all at once, because you can't do it all at once, but $110 million over a period of years. So what are the sources of revenue we came up with for your plan of finance? You can do pay as you go from budget annual revenues. You've been doing a lot of that over the years here and doing a lot of pay as you go improvements. Accumulated fund balances. So the difference between fund balances and annual revenues is money that you budget every year as part of the budget. Fund balance is the savings, dipping into your fund balance to do maybe a larger project than what you just do on an annual basis. And, one of the things we talked about in the administration and preparing for this presentation was, part of, if you're going to use fund balance, prior to doing that, we believe, Ann and I both believe, that you really need to analyze your current fund balance policy to establish a policy that really because a lot of school districts have a fund balance policy that's just a number that was determined arbitrarily at some point in time. It may come from the press service that gives you policy recommendations. But we recommend really analyzing what your true fund balance policy needs, especially if you're going to bring it down. So for example, if you wanted a fund balance of that provides for your cash flow needs and other unforeseen needs to have money there in case of emergencies, or the state delaying payments again, all those things that are always possibilities because you're in the state of Illinois, determine that right percentage before you start bringing it down. And we always recommend a range. Just don't pick one number, 50% or something. You have a range because things will always fluctuate. And if you chose 50%, you got right down to 50%, well, next year your budget grows, and even if you have a balanced budget, you're going to drop below 50%. So those are future conversations that we believe you should have in determining your fund balance policy. And then clearly communicate that to the public, what you are using that fund balance for. And some mistakes that schools do is they may decide, hey, we don't have what we want right now in our fund balance and in our capital projects fund, but over time we're going to put more and more towards that. We have a $3 million surplus. We're going to use that for capital. Well, don't leave that sitting in an operating fund if you're going to do that, like the O&M fund or the Ed fund, because when they're in those funds, you start building those balances up, you might lend yourself to a property tax objection. So what you want to do is, if you're setting that aside for capital, move it to the capital projects fund, because then it's clearly delineated for being for capital, and it reduces the risk of a property tax objection. You have a school district not far from here that did everything I just said, and they built up all this money, but they left it in the O&M fund. And some attorney came along, got some businesses to file a property tax objection, and now they're in the middle of a lawsuit for doing the right thing, just because they left it in the O&M fund instead of putting it in the capital projects fund. Grants, and I wouldn't put a lot of stock into grants. The state hasn't funded its grant program in over 20 years. There's no talk in them doing it now, but there's always hope, right? And then donations from the developer, impact fees and the land fees that the mayor was just talking about. Those are dollars that can go towards capital. And then lastly, when those things aren't enough, then you turn to financing, right? And you have the non-referendum bonds payable from property tax and sales tax. You have referendum bonds, which are also payable from property tax and sales tax, because you've been abating and paying your referendum bonds from sales tax. And then you have alternate revenue bonds, which are paid just from the sales tax.
So before we move on to talking about the different kinds of non-referendum bonds, do you guys have questions so far? I know it's a lot of information, some dry stuff. Okay, all right, so the non-referendum bond types, as Bob mentioned, we're not gonna cover them all, we're just gonna talk about the ones that we think are really applicable to you all. Two primary types that are supported by your property taxes. Working cash fund bonds, which do count against your debt service extension base, so that $2.4 million annual number that we talked about. If we're selling working cash fund bonds, we have to fit within that number. But they can be used for any purpose, okay? So they are the most flexible borrowing tool. They do require a 30-day petition period whereby you pass a resolution of intent to issue the bonds. You publish a notice in the paper notifying the community of your intention to sell the bonds and the purpose for the bonds. And then there's a 30-day period during which the community, if they wish, can pick up petitions at the district office and file those here with you within the 30 days. And if you have 10% of your registered voters who sign a petition, you can't issue those working cash fund bonds without putting it on the ballot. You can take it, put it on the ballot, and then you can sell them, but you can't sell them on a non-referendum basis if a petition is filed. So that is required of a working cash fund bond and also a public hearing. Those bonds are paid from the levy again within the debt service extension base cap. Life safety bonds can only be used for life safety projects, as Bob just discussed, that have been approved by ISB. So your architect creates amendments for life safety projects that qualify for that work, and then you submit that to ISB, and they hopefully approve it. They are getting a little stickier than they used to be due to that legislative change that just happened, because it has created an onslaught of new health life safety requests, as you can imagine. So as long as you have your ISB health life safety approvals, you can sell health life safety bonds, and those do not require that 30-day petition period and the notice in the paper because they've been mandated. It is a mandated health life safety improvement, okay? You do still have to have a public hearing on those. And those bonds would be on the property tax levy without constraint of the debt service extension base. And then the last type of bonds that we will be talking to you about tonight are called alternate revenue bonds. Alternate revenue bonds are exactly that. They're bonds secured by an alternate revenue source. In this case, your sales tax revenue. So they're not on the levy. They have a backup levy on the property taxes were sales tax ever to be insufficient to pay the bond payment. But they also have a mandate that you basically sell with a 25% cushion. So for example, if your sales tax revenue is $4 million, you can only sell bonds up to $3.2 million. Am I doing that math right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that you have an $800,000 cushion in case sales tax revenue, because it's variable, right? It's not a guaranteed revenue stream. It's based on the economic cycle.
And that's the annual payment,
Yep.
that the amount.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the annual payment. Okay. So sales tax bonds have that requirement that we basically build in that cushion. You don't lose that sales tax revenue, that $800,000 a year. You can use for pay-as-you-go projects, or you could use it to abate health life safety bonds. Okay. These bonds, alternate revenue bonds, do also still have that public notice period in the paper. Only 7.5% of the registered voters on that, as opposed to 10% on the working cash fund bonds. These bonds are very rarely controversial with the community because they are not going on the property tax levy. You're paying it from existing revenue stream. But it is still the requirement that we post this and go through this process. I think that's it on the alternate revenue bonds. Anything you would add on those?
No.
All right. Any questions on those? And obviously, then the fourth option is referendum bonds. okay? If bonds are on the ballot and approved by voters, none of those things apply, okay? We don't have to do the 30-day petition period, we don't have to have a public hearing, because the process of the referendum itself is providing all of that transparency to the community, okay? So there's no limitation on the projects you can do as long as they're qualified tax exempt projects. You can you're not constrained by health, life, safety, for example, okay? If it's on the ballot and the voters approve it, you can do it, okay? All right. Wanna,
Sure.
yeah?
So here are the scenarios where we assume as early as 2025, if you wanted to get started at the projects, is that you would issue the DSEB bonds, which under the school code are working cash bonds, but for ease of vernacular, we'll say DSEB bonds, okay? DSEB bonds would net $29 million. And then 3 years later, you do life safety bonds for a total of $30 million. And we didn't just pull that $30 million out of thin air. Mrs. Armstrong went to your architect and asked for a range of that 110 million, roughly how much of it could be life safety bonds, and it was like, I think 29.5 to 35 million. So we just rounded it to the lower number at 30 million. And then you have, we say they're in an and or in both of those. It also could be referendum bonds you're selling at the time. If you decide to take the path of referendum, it'd be a $29 million referendum bond the first time and a $30 million the second time. So this path follows for whether it's a DSEB, like safety bond combination, or a referendum bond combination, the outcome here is the same. You can choose ultimately which path you want to do.
Or you can do some of both.
Right. And then you issue the alternate bonds in 2029 for 24.4, and then 32 for 26.8. The reason why it's 2029 is that's when your current bonds are retired and you no longer need to use the sales tax to abate taxes. You can now redirect it towards paying these alternate bonds and provide for the capital projects. So then those all total up to 110 million. And a guiding principle in this plan of finance is that there's no increase in property taxes. So it does, for the first two series of bonds, the 25 bonds, and just a tad bit on the 28 bonds, you do have to restructure a bit of the outstanding debt service to keep the payment from going up. Not a ton, but you have to do a little bit.
So let's just pause there. So this is very spread out, right? So we're starting in 25 and selling 4 times through 2032. It doesn't have to exactly be that. Again, remember, this is just, we've made so many assumptions here. We made assumptions on interest rates. We made assumptions on what your EAV will do. We made assumptions on how much is health, life, safety eligible. You gotta start somewhere, okay? But I just wanna make sure that you all understand this, it's pretty staggered. And the point that Bob made, it does not matter whether these are referendum bonds or non-referendum bonds, because either type of those bonds are on your levy. And we've assumed no tax increase. We're holding the tax rate where it is currently. After you abate, the net amount that's on your levy right now is what we've assumed would be the tax rate going forward. So again, that doesn't matter whether it's a referendum bond or a non-referendum bond. And then once you're done abating your current bonds, this plan assumes you use the sales tax revenue for alternate revenue bonds. Okay? You currently don't have that money available for capital projects. Under this plan, depending on which scenario we look at, and Bob's about to get to that, whether we're using all of the sales tax revenue or 80% of the sales tax revenue, but under this plan, a lot or all of the sales tax revenue would be committed to these alternate revenue bonds. Okay?
And for one clarifier, that I believe prior to my coming to the district, you had done restructure in 2021. You had restructured some bonds, and at that time, there was already a precursor conversation that there was a look to do a restructure in 2025-26. And so that was already something that had been on the radar from my predecessor. And I just wanted to kind of remind that conversation that happened. So when Ann and Bob are talking about this requiring some restructure, that had already been on the radar to do that, because you do still have one set of those bonds that have a bigger balloon payment coming at that end, that they were already on the radar to look at those. So that was, I don't know who all was sitting here, because I certainly was not, but if you were part of that conversation, I think we can always go back and look at some of those documents as well, that it was conversations that were taking place to do a restructure in that 25-26 timeframe.
Yeah, if you go back to slide 4, you'll see the last 2 payments on your current bonds have just a little blip up. And we did talk back in 21, I mean, those of you who were here, I don't know, 4 or 5 restructurings, we did a lot of them over the years. To fix your levy, and it's fixed, and you save the taxpayers a lot of tax rate, a lot. So kudos to the board for managing that situation. But we do still have this little blip. And the plan was always to come back and fix it. Those bonds weren't callable yet, which meant we couldn't restructure them back in 21 without costing new money. And there was no need to fix the problem then, because the problem doesn't happen for 3 more years. So we were going to wait and fix this before the blip happened. If you're moving forward with this plan, we would just incorporate that fix into this plan.
Just a quick question for clarification, Bob or Ann. So to make this work, these 4 different alternatives, we would need the restructure, right? We talked about that in the past, but to make this work so that we're holding the tax rate, and if I heard you correctly, we won't increase the property taxes, we would have to restructure them no matter what, right? To get this to work in that scenario.
Well, the size of the restructuring is larger if you do the new money. And if you look at the graph right here, this is what Ann was talking about
Slide
earlier.
14.
Yeah, slide 14 at the bottom of the summary. You know, you see that there's no increase in the payment from where you're currently at. And then the dark blue are your current bond payments you have outstanding. And then these dark blue payments are what gets restructured a bit to make room for the light blue. The light blue is the DSEB, or the working cash bonds. So to make room for those payments and not have, because if we just did these light blue payments, then that would go up by that amount of the light blue in each one of those years. So by restructuring, we make room for the light blue by moving some of the dark blue out into these couple more years here, okay?
Does that make sense?
And you notice the little blip is gone, and that's because you either take care as part of the restructuring. One of the things we talked with Mrs. Armstrong about is you do have some sales tax dollars in that fund that we could use to just pay down some of that ahead of time with some of the cash that's sitting there, and not have to restructure those blips. You know, you don't have to make that decision tonight too, but that's just another option. There are many options on the table. And then the green represents the life safety bonds. So again, the working cash / DSEB bonds are this lighter blue, and that has to fit into the DSEB. So that's why it goes out more years to get the money that I think it was $29 million. $29 million. The life safety bonds, we can amortize those however we want, because they're not structured limited to the DSEB anymore. So we fit those in to start paying right after your referendum bonds are essentially retired. And then those are only outstanding for about 10 years or so afterwards, which then is, and there's intent on that, we're talking to the administration, is because guess what? Life safety needs come around every 10 years. So you'd want your life safety bonds to be coming due when the next 10-year life safety survey comes around. So you have the ability to go out and finance those at that time versus amortizing these over a longer period of time and still having them outstanding. And one point I don't think either one of us made is the years for these financings, 25, 28, 29, 32, just like the life safety amount, we didn't just pull that out as an assumption, we got that from the architect. The years here also reflect the capital plan your architect put together. So the amounts that we're getting would meet funding needs that year and 2 years afterwards. And the reason for that is tax exempt bond proceeds, you have to have a reasonable expectation to spend 85% in 3 years. So you borrow, spend it over 3 years, borrow, and so on and so forth. And, as Ann, I think mentioned, or one of us mentioned, although we have life safety going DSEB / working cash going first, then we have life safety, the order of those could be flip-flopped, or it's more than likely to do a combination thereof. We do a $15 million life safety and a $14 million working cash bond. And then you come back 3 years later and, so you don't have to do these discrete issuances. You can mix it up, do a combination of life safety and working cash.
Right, because you might say we're gonna do work at Washington in 2028 and 5 million of work at Washington, 2 million of it is health life safety eligible, 3 million's not. So we'll fund it that way. So you 100% can mix all these pieces together.
Now, the one complexity we didn't discuss yet, you notice there's 2 columns of numbers. And the title is 1 times coverage on the alternate bonds 1 1/4. Because Ann mentioned legally, we have to have 1.25 coverage on the alternate bonds. And if you want to pledge and use 100% of your sales tax, the reason you would do that is because then you pay down those alternate bonds faster because you're putting more revenue towards it. Well, to meet the legal requirement, then you have to pledge another revenue source. So you can pledge the sales tax plus some EBF money, or sales tax plus your O&M tax. Doesn't mean you have to use your O&M tax. You're intending to pay it off from sales tax, but you're using those other revenue sources to provide the legal coverage. Now, if we happen to have a recession and the sales tax you collect dips below that bond payment because we went right up to what you're currently getting, you then would have to cover whatever was below the sales tax from that other pledged revenue or some other revenue source. So there's a little bit of risk if there's ever a recession. So if you turn over to the next slides, then you can see the benefit is here's where you pledge another revenue source to get 1 times coverage. So you pay off the alternate bonds in a much shorter period of time. I think that's 18 years. And here on the bottom half, if you only pledge the sales tax, well, then you're going out to 2057. You're going out many more years, which means it's taking you longer to pay it off. It also means you're paying back more interest costs. The con of this one is you don't have annual sales tax revenues to use for something else because you're planning to use it all towards a bond payment. Here, it's about $800,000 or so a year. You can use that for pay-as-you-go capital or abate the life safety bonds, like Ann said. So, and again, we're showing discrete items here, sort of the bookends. You can do the 1 1/4, you could do 1, or you could decide, you know what, we don't want to go all the way to 1 just to protect us in a recession, but we like to pledge another revenue and go to 1/10. That way, if there's a little dip in sales tax, we're still protected a bit, but we'll still be able to pay the bonds off faster. So it's not one or the other, you can go anywhere in between if you wanted to.
You also could just pledge half the sales tax. You could say, I'm only willing to commit 2 million of sales tax a year, what will that get me? Okay, and we can do that math for you. So it's unending fun with math. So,
Well, and we've got the 110 million is really where you started from.
Right.
that's right.
We could, like, when we met at the regular board meeting, we looked at a $71.5 million in terms of that initial scope, which would still give us some additional space there. So because this is pledged out for 110, doesn't mean it has to be 110. It could be any number of different variables depending on what direction the board wanted to go.
Yeah, the point of this presentation is to show you, you can get to 110, and this is how you would do it. But it takes time, and it takes using a fair amount of your sales tax for a while, and it takes using your debt service extension base. I mean, and plus some health life safety. So, I mean, we have 3 easy tools in our tool belt, and we gotta use them all to get there, okay? But we can get you there.
And can you just talk a little more about what is the actual impact on the taxpayer if you do this?
No difference from your current existence. The bond tax rate stays exactly the same. The sales tax revenue that you are already collecting, you will keep collecting at the same rate that you're collecting it. With the caveat that it is just subject to economic cycles, that's not a guaranteed revenue source. It stays a 1 cent sales tax, continues to be collected on the same things, but your revenues will be based on actual sales, whatever the actual sales are. So sales tax revenue and your bond tax rate stay exactly the same as they are currently. As your EAV changes, the dollar amount collected moves, okay? So you have to be careful to say no tax increase to a taxpayer, because depending on what happens with their property value, they might still have a tax increase, okay? Because the tax rate can be the same to them, but if the home value goes up, they will pay more in taxes, okay? So the tax rate under this model stays exactly the same, and the sales tax revenue is pledged under this model. So no tax rate increase, no change to the sales tax, and you can execute this plan.
Well, in fact, if EAV continues to grow, the rate will go down.
The rate will go down.
Because
Right.
one fundamental factor that differs from this, from the last time you did major capital borrowings, is the plan that was done way back when assumed EAV growth and your bond payments went up over time. Because assumed it was gonna grow with EAV, well, what did EAV do?
Assumed it was gonna grow 8%.
Yeah, and so we kept that fundamental change in place, is that you have a flat bond levy, it doesn't go up. So, that is eliminated this time around as part of the plan of finance that you had when you first, did the big capital plan 20-some years ago. And the other thing Ann and I thought was very prudent as well, is this non-referendum DSEB bond, it goes out 20 years. Legally, you can go out 30 years. But we didn't think it made sense. One, you pay back a lot more interest. You would get some more dollars, but you'd be paying back a lot more interest doing those extra 10 years. And the type of projects you're doing, a lot of it's rehab and things of that nature that maybe you don't wanna do 20 years because, 30 years, because the life cycle of it. It's not like you're building a new building. If you're building a new building, 30 years makes a lot of sense to spread that burden. The other point I would make is the 110 million, like it was mentioned, that number can change. If it goes up though, unless some of that 110 million is life safety, or let's say you go up to 115, unless that additional change is life safety, the green's not changing, the blue's not changing, it'd be the alternate bonds that have to go up, which means they're going out longer. You'll be paying them back over a longer period of time. So just want you to be aware of that. Yes, the number can get bigger, but it means more alternate bonds and a longer period of time to pay them back.
I do want to mention that, because it is a concern, we spend a lot of time talking about tax levy at that time. This plan does honor the commitment that this board made when they enforced or enacted that sales tax, that will still be 100% used to pay off that referendum debt abatement. So we did not want to, as we talked through this, and I was a taxpayer when that was passed. I was, here as we pushed that referendum. It was very important to this community, and it's been very important to us as a district and to all the people who've sat at the board, that we continue to abate that debt. That's why we did the sales tax, and it is honoring that commitment 100% in saying that we will abate that for those original taxes. Now, restructuring, things like that, those all come into play, and then we can start using some of that abatement money for other options. But I did want to make sure, because I know Ms. Hauck and I have had many conversations about this, and staying true to that commitment is a very important component. And so is there a legal requirement that we do that? No, there isn't. We could start using that at any point. But that was the agreement that was made, and I want to make sure that we are at least consciously making decisions that we try to honor those commitments that were made before any of us were sitting here.
But in reality, once we got to a point after we paid that off, we wouldn't be paying that, we wouldn't be abating that anymore. We'd be subsidizing new debt.
Yes.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're the only school district that I'm aware of that's made that commitment to sales tax.
Correct.
Yeah.
To use it 100% for abatement.
So,
You guys, And you passed it on that basis.
And it's all passed.
And the portion that they did mention very quickly is that as we were finalizing the audit, which is gonna be presented to you guys next month, we have seen high, I have to make projections based on what the past trend was with sales tax. We have collected in excess of what we've abated, so we have excess balance in debt service. And so that $2 million that's sitting out there that's been collecting, we are going to be looking at options of doing some prepayment and getting some of that debt off, because again, honoring a commitment that this is gonna be used for debt, although I'm not going to abate $2 million that's sitting out there in fund balance, we can look at defeasance and other options that are out there to make sure we pay off some of that debt early. Just like if you make extra payments to your credit cards, it cuts that interest. So, we're trying to take advantage of all of those options to us.
I do think though that, I know that the chance of the alternative bond, the 1.25, is probably less likely than the other one. But in essence, in a way, what you're doing is you're getting close to paying off the mortgage of your house, and now you're taking out a new 30-year mortgage on your house. And if you do 30 years, you're living past my life, and I know I'm old, I get that part. But you're gonna that's living past my lifetime. So for a lot of people, they need to understand, 30 years doesn't seem like a big deal now, but 30 years is like taking out your whole mortgage all over again, right when you just got ready to pay it off.
Yeah,
At the
and
same time, just wanna throw in there too, 30-year should be the useful life of a new building. And I'll look to Stephen over here on that.
Building's gonna last longer than that, but
Okay.
systems and components will need replacement at the 25 to 35-year mark, depending on what it is. And if I could just, one little thing I wanna remind you about is, first of all, I've been through this 3 times on my own board, fully understand this is very common and how it is, and we have another district that's looking to build a very large high school, and it's a big number, and they will look at the 30 years because it's a new building, right? Brand new building. The one thing I would probably remind you about, and Bob kind of touched on it a little bit, is that 110 number, which you already said maybe we aren't going that far yet, right? But that 110 number is in current dollars. So, and those current dollars are coming up on a year old now, getting close to that. So when you're looking at the phase plan, which makes absolute sense on how you're approaching this fiscally, you do have to factor in, there's gonna be some escalation on those costs for construction, nothing gets cheaper. So you want to have some wiggle room or refinancing room to allow, like you said, you're holding that, to give you some flexibility so that if you do ultimately try to do all the 110, by the time you get to the end of this process in 29, 32, that 110 might be 118, 121, depends on where those fall. So you want to have some flexible, workable room in there without having to raise the tax rate, so.
Yeah, and that's sort of the counterpunch to that is we haven't assumed any increases in the EAV or the debt service extension base over this 5-year plan. We're assuming today's EAV and
Sales tax.
today's sales tax and today's debt service extension base and some padded interest rates. So we've tried to be conservative on our end so that at, 2 years from now, when we're issuing the second set of bonds, we can say, well, EAV's higher, debt service extension base is higher, we have a little more wiggle room. But still to fit within all the
Keeping that rate
constraints,
the same.
so everything's still flat, still no impact. But we've used today's dollars too, which on our end is good for dealing with the other side.
And worth noting as well, I think, is that we haven't talked about our contributions via fund balance or our O&M budget. We haven't had any of those conversations as a part of this. This is simply as a standalone option.
Yeah, this plan of finance is, it's more akin to what we see from our city clients than from our school clients, where you have these variety of different revenue sources, things are layered out. And these things are sort of a living, breathing sort of plan where you do that first phase, do that first borrowing, and then you come back and incorporate all the new assumptions and you refresh things. Maybe something gets pushed off or something gets a little bigger. It's a dynamic plan, it's not a static plan, it's gonna change over time. And
You're gonna get into a building and you're gonna find something you didn't expect, and then you're gonna decide you're gonna move this priority over here. I mean, it's just, and that's okay. that's the advantage of spreading it out like this. It gives you some ability to respond to those changes instead of having just a fixed budget that doesn't give you any breathing room.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to look, I'm not trying to argue either way on these, but I also think we need to look to the future too, is that I agree, you know, what the life expectancy of buildings is, I get that part, and we have some newer ones like Belvedere North, South, for example, Meehan too, Lincoln to some extent too. But we also have some older ones in BHS, South, Caledonia, Perry, I mean, as it is now, but by that time, it probably, hopefully won't be like that, but we also have needs that we're gonna need in the future, and I think we've seen that as we move forward on some of these buildings. For whatever reason, are requiring a lot more attention now than they were before, and some of the ones that we have that are newer now are gonna be in that situation later. I'm sure there was a time when a board sat around here at one time and was faced with Logan closing and Lincoln, the old Lincoln closing, the old middle school closing, and things like that back in the day, where you have to have flexibility to be able to address those problems 20 years from now or 15 years from now. And I'm not saying we can't do all that, but I mean, I think we need to be aware of that too.
Well, and I think that's part of this plan. The 10-year plan is to be able to have that needs assessment, to know where we are so that we can start making that plan. This is when they project out 1 through 3, 5 through 7, and 7 through 10, that's telling us, okay, your natural life expectancy of a roof is 20 plus years. Okay, so in year 7, this roof at Meehan right now is at age, 10, so we're going to have to address it in this year 7 to 7 to 10, or that was what that needs assessment did, which is what we're building. That we have the needs assessment, which I keep reiterating is a separate document than the master plan. So the needs assessment is what do we need to do to be current, to do the deferred maintenance that was put off well before my time, and trying to figure out where we are. Now, the master plan is taking that 50-person committee that met and developed what that vision was, what we wanted to, what our community, what our people in the area wanted to see the vision. Does it have color? Does it have an early childhood? What was their vision? Needs assessment, what we have to do to just stay current. Master plan is where do we want to see us going? And this is trying to take that funding option of commingling those two together, but they are two very separate entities. And so we have to address, so we don't have that deferred maintenance. We're looking at that needs assessment to say, yep, at North, we are going to be at this point and this point. And at Perry, we're well past these points. And so we have to address those. But it's building that 10-year plan that's a fluid document now that come year 5 in this, we should have, we're not just saying, here's 10 years, we're never going to touch it again. Each year, we're adding year 11, year 12, year 13, because the things that are falling off here are coming on this end. And that's why we have the digital version that we can keep saying. As you indicated, something happened here as we dug in and said, oh, that's not where we thought. We thought we had 5 more years. We don't. We need to take this off the 4 to 7, put it in the 1 to 3, and now maybe this roof isn't as bad. We can push that out to this year and kind of doing that fluctuation.
Just one really quick, on the life safety and the working cash ones, are those what affectionately was called backdoor referendums? That's what I thought.
That's the petition period.
Well, the life safety is not, because there's
Well,
no
that's
petition
right,
period.
And it used to be, but it isn't anymore.
Yep.
Yeah, I think whatever we do, we ought to move forward, is that people ought to make a conscious choice of what they want to do. I mean, I know we can do that, I get that fact, I get we can bond all that money, I don't dispute that for a second. But I also think when people want to spend money and you're looking at a big amount over a lot of years, people should make a conscious choice of what they're gonna use their money for. That's a lot of money. So I'm not saying we should never use a backdoor referendum, especially for life safety. The working cash one might be another issue for me at least.
And that's truly, that's just that's a local
Yeah, I know.
decision.
I
There,
understand.
you can do either one, which is why all of this says And or referendum, and
Yeah,
or referendum.
yeah, you could swap out the working cash for referendum. yeah.
Sure.
Any of this you could do via referendum. You could vote the whole 110 million and then just use sales tax to abate part of those bond payments, as, instead of issuing alternate revenue funds. And still get to the same graph, it would look the same way. So, it's, endless ways we can slice it.
Do we know what number this hypothetical 110 million becomes if we don't issue new debt? I mean, what can the district afford to do if we put the whole 110 out for referendum and it fails? Where are we?
That's a great question.
So, as your audit's gonna be presented next month, the unofficial fund balance in your O and M went down $2 million from what it was prior year, so we're right at $9 million in your O and M fund for operations and maintenance. In your capital projects, you are sitting at this point at $2.4 million that you have available. Within the O and M budget, we typically try to put at least $1 million to $1.5 million in projects that they can do. Now, that isn't, you can't do a whole lot for that when you gotta look at everything. But as you can see, we went $2 million over this year with all the problems that we've uncovered. Saying he has $2 million to put into projects, well, he's been putting $2 million into, oh my gosh, this just broke and we have to fix it. Now, our ed fund, we have a more substantial, we have about 65 million in our O&M fund, which this all comes with your cash on hand and what you're looking at for our tier funding and what we're looking for funding. So in the ed fund, you're gonna hear, we probably have about 360 days of cash on hand. So we could operate, if we didn't get our tax money, by fund balance in ed fund, we could operate for 360 days. It is a healthy fund balance, but it's also paying, it comes into the factor of our district score, which affects your bond rating. So we're at a 3.9%. We will never get a 4.0 until we finish paying off debt and we don't have that percentage. So it's here or there. The one caution that I will always say is if we start spending this fund balance down and we start doing that, that's going to affect your rating, which is going to affect your bond rating, which is going to affect how well or easy you can. Not saying we don't use fund balance. We have flexibility in there. But I will always say caution on what we're doing. We are coming off years of influx of money coming from ESSER. This will be our first budget that we're putting forward to say we don't have ESSER money coming in. And you still have the 3 months of ESSER. You're going to see inflated numbers for revenue because the boiler projects and all of those things are coming out of this year. And we're going to get that reimbursement, but that's all ESSER dollars. So part of the conversations we're having is giving you options of what is your budget without the grants and what does that look like so you can truly see what your operational are. So I don't know if that quite answers. It gives you kind of where we are. I am very cautious at this point about spending down too much from O&M because with it losing $2 million in it this year, I am fearful of us saying we're going to deficit spend another $2 million when we see utility costs go up 181% this year. So we're going to see budgets that have much higher electricity costs for us and looking at those options. We start looking at solar, which are options, and this is getting on a whole conversation that's really next board meeting. But we don't have infrastructure in our roofs and in our things because of our capital plans. I can't support solar panels on our buildings at this point because I don't have roofs and infrastructure that can support that. If we do items in our capital plan and we replace roofs, then solar is an absolutely wonderful option that we can look at that will help defray some of those electricity costs. So there's a lot of components that are going to go there. So yes, we can use fund balance, and we will have conversations about what can we do with that O and M fund balance versus the ed fund balance, and do we want to move some for one-time expenditures? The board has the option of passing a resolution that says, I want to move a one-time $3 million from ed fund, fund balance over to O and M or to capital projects, so that we can do that, because we do have that excess. But that takes a resolution from the board, because you text for the ed fund and you text it here. So to tell the taxpayers, yes, I'm going to move this out of the education fund and put it into my O and M or my capital projects. So those are some of those conversations that as we get through budget and we start talking through that and setting that plan. And when I talk about those riverbanks and knowing kind of the priorities of what we're putting, this helps me develop that and now provide you next, coming up with a budget calendar we're talking about every month going forward of where are we and what's it developing.
So we would not be able to pay for our for the projects in our 10-year plan without issuing debt.
Correct.
So without issuing debt, we don't even pay for the things that we need to do to keep our buildings.
In my
Functional.
opinion, you continue to operate as you are, which is whack-a-mole. Let's fix what's dying right now, and that we're not doing a lot of those other projects. That is how, in my opinion, that is how we got where we are right now, is that we did not make a plan, we did not move forward, and now we know where we are. I mean, none of us can claim ignorance. We have this document that tells us where we are. Now we have to decide how we're going to address those moving forward.
I think the only, I mean, from somebody who's sat with these for a long time now, the only thing that bothers me a little is this has nothing to do with your stewardship of this at all, but back, like in 2010, I looked at these charts when I helped out one of the bargaining units a few years ago, is that we had a fund balance of about $20 million, depending on who you ask. I mean, that 20 million was like our flexible one we have now, depending on what taxes you want, early tax, no early, whatever, but we'll just keep the number of what was on the chart at 20 million. Now at one time we were over 80, we were like 82 or 83 or something like that. So if we deferred all this stuff, the logical question would be is as we built $60 million, over 60 million, over, in this case, let's say 13, 14 years, how'd we do that? How'd we build 64 million yet now, say over all those years, we had to do whack-a-mole to keep up with stuff and expect, I mean, we did that for 14 years, why would we expect something different now? I mean, and we built that surplus pretty big. I mean, the numbers don't lie. It was 20 million then, it was 80 something a year or two ago at least. So we built over 60 million in that surplus account, for what?
Well, I think your 80 million, and this is just my preliminary thought, I think the 80 million you're talking is when they talk about operational. So
Oh, it
that
is.
would be
No, that's
your ed,
100%
your O and M, your transportation, and those would be those, funds all together. And so if you take all those together, yeah, you're gonna be at that 80 million. I mean, if I take across all funds, if we have all 9 funds, I'm looking at fund balance of 106.
And I'm saying that 14 years ago, looking at all those funds,
Yep.
it was 20 million.
Right. And I can't answer that. I really can't. And
I mean, part of it is our expenses have grown significantly in that time. I mean, the vast majority of our expenses are salaries and benefits, and if you look at salaries and benefits in 2010 compared to where they are today, it's a huge, huge increase. One thought I have with fund balances, I was on the board, I think Holly and Jorge were also on the board when we had our regular board meeting, I think in July before the school year started. And a agenda item on that meeting was, what will we do if we don't receive our state payments? How long will we be able to keep our doors open? And some school districts around Illinois were looking at being able to keep their doors open for 12 days, 30 days. It was a surreal conversation to have. It was scary. I mean, we talked about whether or not we would offer sports that fall, because that would be a way to save money and keep our doors open longer. So I probably have some PTSD from that little conversation, because it was real and scary, and the state came through, but, you know, the state of Illinois giveth and the state of Illinois taketh away. And I probably lean toward, a healthier fund balance than some, because I mean, school districts across the state almost got burned and learned a lesson.
I was at that actual meeting. It was like the only meeting I was at prior to a couple of years ago. That was like 6 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a little while ago.
It was 6 years ago. And if I remember correctly, it was, the good side of it was, out of all the districts around here, we could survive for 7 or 8 months, or 9 months, maybe they said.
Yeah, I don't think it was quite that long, but
It-
it was,
it's pretty
it was not
close.
the full
But-
school year.
But a lot longer than anyone else.
A lot
And-
longer
and-
than a lot of
And to
districts,
hear,
yes.
and this is a good meeting, because to hear our position, even if we didn't do some things right, we're in a pretty good position from what you're telling us by comparison to many. And I guess my goal is to make sure whatever decisions we make, when whoever's here 10 years from now or 15 years from now, that they're left in a position similar to what we are, because that's our responsibility. What I think it comes down to, and I've been really spending a lot of my time trying to figure out, to your point, we have a needs assessment, right? And that's the things that maybe not all of them have to be done, but probably a lot of them, right? And then we have a facilities plan, which is more your wants. I think there's a fair amount of cutting, and I think all of us should be looking at, what do we really need? What do we really want? What is fluff? Because the facilities plan, to your own admission, when you did it, was kind of a pie in the sky thing. And there's extra meat that can be cut out of that, and we should be trying to do. I'm not saying I'm for or against anything that's been proposed, but I want to leave the district in the position that it's in for the future generations, so they don't have, to worry about being at the edge and losing sports or anything else. I think that's our job. So I think our conversation is, whenever that meeting is on the 19th, is to come and really know, how are we gonna get to this? How can we achieve the things we want, and maybe give up some other things, and things that maybe haven't been done that were asked for years and years. Maybe we need to look at those things and maybe take care of that stuff. Know the unforeseen, or have more in our budget for these things that seem to pop up out of nowhere, right? So we don't have $2 or $3 extra $1 million a year on those. That's the challenge to this whole process, to me. And that's what I'm really trying to figure out and plan to bring to the next meeting, which is the
16th.
16th.
16th. And I think that's exactly what we want to be having that conversation about at the 16th. And again, we have that initial scope at that 71.5. That in and of itself includes 4 different options and pathways for Perry, and only includes that tier 1 of the facility needs assessment. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why we have our guests here tonight, is to give us an idea what that financial picture looks like. And then it really will be incumbent upon the board to decide which of those projects we want to move forward on, and in what manner we want to do so. And I think that will be, I'm very hopeful, maybe in September, October, maybe at the latest, we would have a direction so we can really start moving forward on some of those mission critical projects. We know our HVAC at South and Washington, for example, are big, expensive projects, and they need to be completed. And we need to find out what the direction's gonna be in order to start making those spends. And we can also outline for you, after hearing this presentation, we can really, I think, do a better job now of saying, here's the time frame under which these different projects, here's what maybe phase 1 looks like based on what we know about our financial situation, here's what phase 2 could look like, here's what phase 3 could look like. And Steve's point, of course, is always really important, that it's today's dollars, and those dollars are just going to continue to increase. So that also is going to be impactful in terms of what the board decides at the end of the day.
So a couple of things that I want to say. I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to do the very best job we can in messaging to the public, right? Because it's very difficult to sit in a seat as a community member. And again, no one's done anything wrong, so it's not an indictment of anybody. But it's difficult to hear that we are, taking a whack-a-mole approach to repairing things with $65 million in the bank, when you're talking about people who really are at home, taking a whack-a-mole approach to whether or not they can
replace air conditioning that is past its useful life, or whether or not they're gonna have to have their house without air conditioning, or whether or not they have to put another layer of shingles on the roof because they can't. That, in their world, there is no money available to do those things. So I think messaging and a component of messaging is going to be incumbent upon the board, the district, right? To just acknowledge, we got here and we're here, and we intend to have a different plan. I think some of that messaging should include that we have to have reserve, and we want to be fiscally responsible and financially solvent for periods of time that prepare for the sudden and unforeseen that could occur, and that we know that going forward. But I wanna bring it back to, and again, this is theoretical, and we're having this high-level discussion about it tonight, but it's time, and I think you said we're hopefully fast approaching, time to stop having high-level conversations and start to get into the meat of things and parry, right? We keep talking about we're gonna do something, but I know myself, I know maybe other board members, I think we've gotten pictures of deficiencies that exist at Perry. We've gotten pictures today of deficiencies that, that exist at South. We've gotten pictures of things that exist at Washington. And I, for one, am of the opinion that insofar as we have buildings or classrooms within buildings that are missing ceiling tiles, and that, we have kids that we have electrical wiring, or we have, issues in gymnasiums or science classes, that's the place where I think in the short term, we just fix those things. Like, we just fix those things so that we don't have teachers going into classrooms saying, let's move desks around so that if we have something that falls out, through, or down from the ceiling, I don't have a kid's desk directly under it. So identifying the tyranny of the urgent, which isn't gonna cost $18 million. Now, I understand these other things are emergency, but we have some things that are urgent, and then we have, I hate to say it, but we have another layer of things that are emergencies. But the urgency of buildings that don't have safe places for kids to learn in, like, open up the checkbook, spend the money, put up ceiling tiles, fix whatever's causing the tiles to need to be out, and fix the other things that are literally critical to the safety of kids in buildings today. That, to me, we don't defer not another day. We figure out a way to operationalize dollars and fix the things that exist, and the multiple things that we've been hearing about just in the first, and again, no indictment of anybody, like, it just is what it is, right? It exists, but those kids are in buildings, in classrooms, where maybe we knew about it, maybe we didn't know about it, maybe we should have known about it, I don't know. But we shouldn't be receiving pictures from teachers that are, pictures like the ones that we've gotten in the last week, right? So I say, at some point in time, that's part of the facility's needs. Classrooms where teachers feel safe to teach kids. Buildings that we have people in that are, safe to, be in the space for its intended purpose, whether it's the gym, or whether it's the science classroom, or whether it's, the sidewalks outside of a school, or whatever it is. And then secondarily, Perry has got to come back around to being actively a part of the conversation, because that's gonna be a big component of what we do, or we have made a board decision that we're not doing anything to address. We've said, yes, we wanna do that, and now, when do we start doing it? So I think this is great, that's wonderful, but we gotta fix the things right now that make buildings, difficult for teachers to teach in. And then secondly, lastly, you made a comment, you called it the rating, and if we use some of our money and our reserves go down, and then, so I'd like to know what that math is. I, for one, would like to know, okay, if we do decide to spend some of our reserve, and then you said it puts us in maybe we're not in the best rating state, right? But what's that in real dollars? So if we go from a 3.9 to a 3.7, how much more do we pay? How much more interest are we gonna pay? So if we modify our position in such a way that we end up costing ourselves more money, well, it's just another way to validate maybe we better keep that money there, because if we spend the dollars only to make the future dollars cost us more, that might not make the most sense either. So, but I'd like to know what that math is. If we went from a 3.9 to a 3.7, I don't know, I'm just picking numbers. What does it cost us? What is the difference between this rating tier and that?
So Moody's get back into our
I wanna-
rating.
I'm gonna, I want to dispel the notion that we are putting teachers and students into classrooms that are unsafe and not doing anything about it. And I'm sure that's not what you meant to say,
Please
but,
speak to that too.
yes, perhaps Mr. Winters or Ms.
No,
Armstrong
I
can talk
would
about
like
what we're doing in
To
that
speak to
regard.
this first for
Yeah,
a minute,
yep.
please. First of all, I respect and appreciate your feedback, and I understand because I met with every teacher at Washington and talked through this. I am concerned about some of the statement. The reason that we are $2.3 million less in fund balance in O&M is because we addressed issues that were causing unsafe environments. Those are the things that, whether I use the wrong term of whack-a-mole or not, it's when we find something that broke in that classroom or something fell down, we are addressing that. That is how we spent $2.3 million out of fund balance already, because we are taking the ability to have class and safe environments very seriously. The $65 million, just for a refresher, school districts and public accounting are fund accounting. You levy in every fund. I cannot take $65 million and move it to O&M or spend it out of O&M, which is Fund 20 versus Fund 10, nor to Fund 60 for capital projects, unless we have a hearing and a resolution to do that. So I do not have a checkbook that has $65 million to just spend, and I'm not sitting here with the purse string saying, no, I'm not going to do this. I apologize if my voice is elevated. This is something that I think is misunderstood, and I do not want Mr. Winters to feel that he is doing the wrong thing either. What we weigh every single decision on is it safe for kids and can they have school? That is our first priority, is can they have school? Is the heat on? Is the electricity on? Is there water pouring from the ceiling? We all remember what happened at Central Middle School in the freeze. Water's pouring from ceilings. It was raining in Central Middle School's kitchen. They couldn't even stand there. These are issues that we are dealing with, and I understand that there are problems that are big at South. There are problems that are huge at Washington. There are problems at Perry, 100%. We can't call somebody today and have them put a project of $700,000 on the books and have it fixed tomorrow. We have to plan, we have to budget, we have to do those things. When I developed the 23-24 budget that had projects and things of that nature, we had a plan, we had tracks in there, we had these things in there. Those things, we couldn't find anybody to bid on them. We couldn't do the work. We were making decisions on Perry. I can't do Perry work this summer if I didn't have it in the budget to fund it for last year when I developed that budget. So this is creating a plan on how we're going to fund those. So I do take a little offense to an assumption that I'm not letting us do the work. We are doing the
I didn't
work
say that,
every day.
Joanne. I didn't say that you're not doing the work. I just said we need to fix the things that we're getting pictures about. And I said, this is not an indictment of anybody. It's not an indictment of you or anybody. That's not what I said. And how we got here is how we got here. However, when we're getting emails, and we are, like we're several this week alone that are showing us images within buildings that don't have ceiling tiles in rooms and things of that nature. Those are the things, I'm not talking about things that we have to do for, I don't know, $700,000. I'm not saying that, but I was very clear from the beginning to say, this is not an indictment of anybody, but I want to see us make a decision to say, okay, whatever amount of money we have to spend to get those things repaired that are currently, existing, that, these teachers are alerting us to, I think we take that serious. Now, I'm not saying that children are in jeopardy or that someone, that there's a risk of, someone in a room, being placed in a room that, is, there's electrical wire. That's not what I said and not what I meant. What I said was we do need to take the things that are urgently missing things that need to, and can be addressed on the relatively moderate side of things, that I just think we need to prioritize those things and then get back to a discussion about Perry and
We
how
are.
we prioritize
Thank
Perry.
you for that clarification.
Yeah,
And
so
we are.
let's,
Yeah.
in real plain terms, folks, we need to be forward-looking on this, because we're in the business of providing a great school education experience and safe buildings. And so that's gonna require ongoing costs year after year into perpetuity, right? And so there, we're always gonna have that cost. And, you know, we have some options here for leverage, debt, if you will, that we can utilize to keep the tax rate as it is today. What we need to use in our next meeting, hopefully, is utilize the master plan, use the needs assessment, and really prioritize what we need to cover. We have some opportunities here. I see the funding for Perry, whether that's rebuilding or brand new school, right? On that already. And we need to make a decision on that, and then prioritize on the remaining. There's other stuff that we need to get to. Yeah, we're probably not gonna spend the whole 110 perhaps, but we need to prioritize and really get some stuff moving along. And there are opportunities here. I'm grateful for Ann and Bob coming by and providing these alternatives for us. Yes, it is leverage, it is additional debt, but hey, if we don't wanna be in the situation that we were before, right, and we're playing all this catch up and deferred maintenance, we're gonna have to utilize some of this debt, on an ongoing basis. And I think there's a great presentation, how we can get there going forward. We don't need to utilize all of it, but we can use some, and a combination thereof, to get to our priorities, and we need to get to those priorities. From what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, we've gotta get to those soon, and Perry should be at the top of that list, and then everything else kind of moving forward from there. But we need to address that, and I'm hopeful on September 16th, we can have a meaningful conversation where we can get to some top priorities and start moving forward with something. But again, I think we need to do something with Perry sooner than later, and that's gotta be on the top priority, so.
Let me just add that, the expenditure, the spending down of fund balance is a relevant credit factor for Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and it is one of the things that we have to talk about when you sell bonds, and we get the school district rated, and we use the credit rating to sell the bonds, and the interest rate is related to the credit rating. But if you're spending down fund balance, the best possible story of spending down fund balance is that you're using it for one-time expenditures for capital projects. And if you're using it to fund your salary increases, you're gonna get downgraded, okay? But if you're using it for one-time capital expenditures, and we can show what Bob talked about, which is we are spending it down, but the board has agreed, this is what we need our fund balance to be. This is our plan to spend it down. We're gonna spend down 5 million this year, 3 million next year, 3 million, and then we're done, or whatever it is, okay? But that we have a plan, and this is what we're using it for, and we're going to maintain this level of fund balance, and Bob and I can work with Mrs. Armstrong on what does that number need to be to keep your rating at its current level, okay? So it is not taboo to spend it, but you need to spend it in a very thoughtful and communicated, planned way.
I'll say one last thing too. I do believe we need to take care of the urgent things right away. I 100% agree with Mr. Herrera on that one. The one I think we need to look at though are the secondary ones, because lately, now that this is getting closer, I think a year ago, people looked at this like it was a ways there. I mean, we're just talking about it. It was the balcony stuff. Now that it's becoming more real, I think, and we're getting closer to it, people are taking a closer look at it and getting a little more serious about it. And recently, I've gotten more feedback than I ever have before on what some of the buildings really want versus what they think this plan is gonna provide them. And they're not the same from what I've gotten lately. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong, I'm just saying I think we need to at least ask or reach out, not with the stuff we need to do right away, I'm not talking about that, I'm thinking the stuff a little ways down the road. Now would be the time to start that conversation, because we won't be doing that stuff right away, but we will be doing it sometime down the road. So make sure that's really what they want, because lately I've gotten the feeling, in some buildings at least, that's not accurate
I would echo
from
that,
their point of view.
100%.
Well, I think we need to have a conversation about that.
I agree, 100% agree.
So
That's the-
what are
that's
we,
the
what are
16th,
we
right?
hearing?
That's when we're gonna do it.
Well, what are we hearing?
It's, there's, I think the 16th is the time to do that when we talk about everything as a whole. and find out everybody, I think everybody to the point of $110 million should show up with their pencil sharpened, which what they think really needs to happen and what we really want to achieve.
And
If we're gonna borrow
align
more
it
money.
with the strategic plan, I
Correct,
think would
100%.
be
100%.
the wise thing to do here, and I know this board has prioritized academic achievement above all else, and I think when we start looking at what we're gonna do with our master plan, we should prioritize that and look to see how the money we spend can enhance academic achievement. I do have a problem, it's very hard when we hear, I'm hearing this from these people, but nobody says what they're hearing exactly, and I don't know who these people are, I don't know if they're teachers, if they're community members, if they're, principals.
All of them.
They're, okay,
Oh,
well, let's hear it then. Like, what good is it for us to hear that some people are telling you something?
I think they don't think, I mean, if you want the truth, I don't think they believe when they did this, the 20-some people that sat down and did this, had a true representation of even stuff like learning environments.
It was more than 20
Some,
people.
but not that showed up at most meetings. I saw the attendance thing, there were some, but most of them was in the 20s. But it doesn't matter, it was 50 or it was in the 20s. We have a lot of buildings in the district. We have a lot of stakeholders in the district. They don't, at least unless they're lying, and I'm not saying they are, I'm
Who
not,
are they and how many? What are we talking about here? There's a process to give feedback, and we should utilize that process as opposed to individual board members saying, the people I know and who are comfortable coming to me with their complaints are saying X. That's not useful. It's not. That's not useful. So if we want to get feedback, there is a process to do that so we get feedback from everyone, whether they have a board member's cell phone number or not.
Well,
That
maybe we
would
need to
be
go back with the top
representative.
three and go back to
of-
buildings and ask them for their top three, because.
Top three what?
The list we got, Carla, the top three things, the list of needs by building,
What?
the top three.
What do you mean,
We got the list
you
of
mean the
that.
facility needs assessment?
No,
No,
we
we
have,
got a
so
list of that.
in,
It's in the
we've
tonight's
asked all the principals
Yeah.
to prioritize those top 3 priority needs. I think that is what this conversation is about, is a feeling that those top 3 priority needs aren't necessarily found specifically in the facility needs assessment. And we know that it would not necessarily be in the
Right.
facility needs assessment because that's based on, as we've said, keeping our doors open. But may or may not be also represented in that facility master plan. I had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Bucher a little bit about this. I've already had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Winters a little bit about this. And in your Friday update, I think you will see how all of those priorities are outlined specifically with what has and has not been done and where you can find those items moving forward. So hopefully we're in a better spot with that for the September 16th meeting. We can certainly engage again with our principals to see if those priorities have changed, shifted. They probably have because several of those projects have been completed. But we can certainly go back to them. A lot of those things are really looking forward, as you said, Matt, to that master plan as opposed to really digging in to that 23 million of initial projects in the needs assessment itself. So I definitely think that can be part of the conversation. And I think, Carla, you make the really strong point of we can't operate on, a whack-a-mole basis of who wants this, who wants that, who's calling which board member. We have to have a plan that we are adopting that makes sense for all of those parties. And I believe in us, we are close, and we can get there. And I think we can have a really powerful conversation on the 16th about it.
So if there are things on the 3 highest facilities need reported by site list that are done,
And there are.
and I don't know what they are, I mean, we just got those with the, last update, or an opportunity without encumbering principals to any degree that they don't have time for in the first month of school, I don't know, to provide additional feedback, if that's something that people, I'm not hearing from anybody on that point, but I'm not saying that other people are not. So if that's something that is being relied upon, right, and we're getting it as a representation of what the buildings are saying are their needs, if they would indicate, or top 3 needs, not all their needs, then maybe that's something that can be updated to provide, all of these are already done.
Yep.
And they've weighed in and adjusted their priorities or added something different or said something different.
We can absolutely
To
have
address
that,
that.
Lisa, for you, and we're pretty close on it right now.
My staff and I meet with every principal monthly. We do walkthroughs of the building every month. And we don't lead the walkthroughs, they do. We don't lead the discussions, they do. We're there for them. We tell them at this every single time. I understand getting pictures and stuff, but you need to think from my perspective as well. You're getting things that are not put into context. And I would really appreciate that people would assume that I had the best intention. Because that is something that I'm required to do for everybody in the district. And I ask, when you get those pictures, everybody has my cell phone, everybody has my email. I will more than happily put things into context for you. Are we perfect? No, we miss things. Over at North, we had the bleachers break down the first day of school. Out of the blue. But now, if you get an email saying that we're not doing our job, look, the bleachers broke down. What do you want me to do? You know, I'm frustrated right now, honestly. I've never been accused of more things in the past year. I've been doing this 20 years. In the past year, I've been accused of more things. Basically, not doing my job, not caring. When I go into a classroom, both my children are teachers. When I go into a classroom, I assume my child is in that classroom teaching. That's how I approach it. You know, you can question my methods, but not my integrity. I will never, ever,
Sean,
ever.
I didn't question your intentions.
I will never, ever.
Nor is it my desire to.
I understand.
So let me say to you, I am not questioning that your intentions to do right by the district or to do what is necessary for safe environments. Nothing I said questioned your integrity, and nothing I said questioned your intentions or that your intentions were wrong. I'm not even directing it at you. So I will say from my perspective, because I'm the one who spoke tonight on those things specifically. I don't change my perspective or my position on wanting to see them done. But again, at no point in time did I say that anyone was to blame for this, but just rather that we get them fixed. And whatever we have to spend to get them fixed, we spend to get them fixed. That was not an indictment of you. So if you've got other things that have come in over the last year, and you need to finish saying whatever you needed to say, but that is not what I said nor what I intended.
No,
I think the problem was, I took
And
your
I would re-
comments
okay,
as
so I'll
as
listen to what you
implying
wanted to say.
that there was, that we were not doing things to keep our classrooms safe.
And
if
I
you
don't know
did
how you
not
could have
intend-
extrapolated that, because I was very clear
I
in the
think-
beginning
I think,
and said, I'm not, where we are is where we are.
well,
So I appreciate
yes.
what you're saying about your interpretation of what I said, and I will take that interpretation under advisement so that I am methodical and careful should I just choose to say something going forward. And I would say that individuals should also take opportunity to determine that you not immediately make assumptions about people's intentions when they say things. So it's very fair to say, I will use that as a takeaway to ensure, but I'm saying also, if you've got a history of the last year, and I don't know what that is, and I don't know what your experience is, Sean, but you can't bear the weight of one conversation tonight to be an indictment of what's been happening to you for the last year, because I certainly didn't say that.
No, and I
So
didn't-
thank you for the takeaway, and I stand by the fact that let's just do whatever it takes to get these things fixed, so
I
that,
appreciate
you know,
that.
kids are in those buildings.
Are we doing that? Are we doing everything we need to do to make sure our kids and teachers are in safe buildings?
I would say, yes, I mean,
Okay.
that we're doing everything within our capacity that we have to do, and we are not putting people in jeopardy.
Okay, then I don't think probably we need to remind you to do that part of your job again, thank you.
Nor do I think, Carla, that you need to decide at every meeting that you need to correct someone. Look, here's the deal. Here's what I'm saying. I took your point. I took your point and I said, thank you for advising that I should be mindful about my approach and how I say it. But to then circle back to a place where you have to scorn me by saying, I don't think you need to be reminded of that. Honestly, what more do you want me to do than to say, thank you for the takeaway. Sincerely, you interpreted it as did others. If we're going to let it go, then let it go.
Yes, I agree, let's let it go. So back to the Perry conversation, it is the board's decision to make. We need to make the decision whether or not we are going to build a new Perry, whether we are going to significantly renovate Perry, or whether we are going to do the repairs that need to be done at Perry to keep the doors open. I don't know why we keep saying, I don't know why the board keeps saying it needs to be Perry, Perry, Perry. Yeah, that's for us to do. That will be decided as soon as we, the 6 people right now around this table, decide what we're going to do. I want to do that. It is, I don't understand, what the problem is there. We all agree that decision needs to get made. I think we've all established that we are going to do what needs to be done to keep the kids and teachers safe at Perry while we are deciding what we're going to do in that regard. If people decide that they want to start making non-necessary repairs at Perry before we decide whether we're gonna keep that building open, that's a decision the board can make. We can say, we are fine with perhaps putting money into Perry that will end up being, sort of obsolete because of a renovation a couple years down the road. We can do that, that's fine, but let's just make that decision so we can all stop. I don't know who we're blaming for us not making that decision yet. Let's
I think-
make that decision and be done with it.
And we can't do- I'm
I think one of the issues though is that, let's take Perry as an example. Without trying to micromanage the situation, we should eventually be presented with a bunch of, some alternatives for Perry.
And
I
we
mean,
have
do we,
that.
do we wanna add on, do we wanna build on a different site? Do we wanna, add on 1/2, 2/2, whatever? We shouldn't even be involved in that, but we should be involved in making a decision, but not in speculation on what we're gonna do or not do. But as an example, I'll just give a quick example. Take the fact that we wanna look at a different site for Perry, there's very few of those out there. I mean, there are very few. I talked to the person, because I was at a funeral, unfortunately, about a week ago, and asked the person who owns the biggest site near Perry, has anybody ever mentioned to you anything about your land or anything like that? Yeah, Dr. Schloman in 2005. Nobody's even mentioned anything to him. So the biggest piece of land there, even if we ever, whether we want to do it or not, we don't even know it's available anyway, or if it
Right.
ever would be. So I mean, until we know those things, it's really tough to make an educated decision. Now we're going to move forward to it until we have some concrete options on what we want to do one way or the other.
Right, but I do think it's putting the cart before the horse a little bit for Joanne to approach Mr. Smith, who owns the largest parcel near Perry, and say, hey, if we want to build a school here, would you be willing to sell us your property? I think we need to decide, okay, we're gonna build our first choice is to build a new Perry. If that's our first choice, then we send Joanne down that road, she talks to Mr. Smith, she talks to other people, she finds out, is this land available? Would we be willing to use eminent domain? Whatever she has to find out. If that then becomes, if it becomes obvious that that's not gonna work, then we go to whatever plan B is. But I'm not gonna send Joanne down that road, that takes time. And in that time, nothing is happening at Perry. Let's decide, if we know we want to build a new Perry, we can make it happen. It might not be exactly there, there might be things that aren't perfect about a new Perry. We can make it happen, but we've got to choose. It's on us to choose, and I know Joanne's done some work with respect to finding land and getting an estimate on how much land acquisition would cost.
It is in the upcoming board update.
So tomorrow.
So you will see tomorrow the result of that land appraisal study.
Yeah, what it could potentially cost.
But I
No,
want
we have
everyone to
not
be-
walked on their property and said, hey, will you sell it? But we've now have an appraisal option of what those land plots would probably be sold for
Sure.
if we go out there and ask them, are you interested in selling?
But
So
I
that,
think
that
we-
gives us a gauge of what we might be spending.
So we'll see
Right.
that
And we
tomorrow, because I thought we were gonna see
Tomorrow.
that tonight, but it's great, now we know it's tomorrow. I mean, we knew it wasn't because it wasn't on the agenda.
And we all need to be thinking about, okay, if we're not gonna build New Perry, what's our second choice, you know?
I
Let's
agree.
go.
And I think tonight, I came to tonight thinking tonight was funding, and I'm glad, great presentation. I think I got it, and was the goal.
It's a lot of numbers.
And I thought the goal
My head's
on
still
the 16th is to do exactly that.
Correct.
And come and to me, my view is, may not be everybody else's, it all goes together,
Yes.
right? So I don't like to pull Perry out and say, just do Perry this. I do agree, like the roof at Perry, probably should just do the roof, right? I mean, probably needs to be done. But everything else goes together and it decides what direction do we want to take. And that, I think, is the 16th conversation. And I think everyone here should come with a plan of how we want to take all the information we've been given and achieve what we really want and do it fiscally responsibly for the district.
Well, and I just want to reiterate, my intention for that September 16th meeting is to bring back forward that 71.5 initial scope, all right, with the 4 outlined options for Perry that run, I think, from 6.7 million up to $24 million, all right? So you'll see how that relates to each pieces of those scope. In the meantime, you'll see those principal preference sheets again and where we're at in terms of pursuing that. In the meantime, you're gonna see the land appraisal. So we'll be able to have all of those conversations on the 16th. And if on the 16th, we can figure out how we think we want those pieces to fit together, that gets us a whole lot closer to determining how it is we are gonna proceed in terms of funding those options. If we're gonna go out to the community, we're gonna ask for a referendum, we're gonna determine what are our most critical needs that we absolutely need to be sure we're funding coming out of that needs assessment. That is gonna be the sort of feedback that we're gonna need from you moving forward. And again, you would have the option as early as that September 16th board meeting, but more likely at that October board meeting to vote forward that master plan. So now we know what the intentions are. But to be absolutely clear, every single thing is gonna, every single thing that's, over $30,000 is gonna be coming right back here for you to approve. And that's going to be, it's not just replacing ceiling tiles at South, it is overhauling the entire HVAC system, which is a multi-million dollar, $5 million project?
It's closer to, I think, 8.
So-
8 or 9, yeah.
An $8 or $9 million project, so it's not the sort of thing that we can just tick
Do.
off the list. So we just need your help in terms of giving us what direction we want to proceed with. And I just think taking that next step of approving the direction of the plan would fundamentally put us all in a better
The
situation.
71 million that you're talking about.
71.5,
Yeah.
Why does it have to be that?
I'm looking at,
it doesn't have to be.
I'm looking at the
Shouldn't have.
tiers model.
Yep,
So, and again, we're in and out of so many different documents.
Yep.
So is it, and I know tomorrow's tomorrow already, is it possible to send paired out of that, the $71 million hit list again? What?
you will have it, yeah, you have it,
Yeah,
that
It's
is.
in the tiers, I get it, I'm looking at, right? I'm
Well,
looking
it's,
at
so
that
it's
right
on the
now.
4th page of the tiers
Yep,
is your
okay.
initial scope. So are you looking for something, if you're looking for something other than what's on that 4th page of the tiers, I need to understand what that is, because I feel like you have that information, so I just need to know what it is that you feel like you don't have.
Well, I get.
Can we get that? Like,
Just tell me whatever it is and I will make sure I get it
Because
for
I
you.
don't not have anything,
when you print it out, it's like,
we're not voting tonight, so it doesn't
No.
matter, but
yours is better than mine. When I print it, I
Okay.
can't read it.
it doesn't matter.
What would also be nice to know too is as we move forward is, when we hear about the 5 million plus from Washington, that's at a minimum.
Yep,
The $8 million from South and stuff
Yep.
like that, how did that fit into the puzzle? I mean, was any of that budgeted before, is that part of the 71 million?
that's part of the 71
million.
million, that is part of the 23 million, that is your tier 1, most critical facility needs assessment projects. Then you have another 80 million that is essentially unfunded. And then you have the other projects that the board has said they would like to prioritize. So Perry, Early Childhood Center, expansion at Everest. So those are the other projects that combine to make that $71.5 million. Then we have that, right, essentially a $40 million gap between where we are and what the ceiling would be in terms of where we could go with what we heard tonight. And again, that doesn't factor in, we think, I heard very clearly an interest in using our fund balance to help assist in this, and that has been the plan all along and is actually part of our strategic plan goal in that area. So we have a lot of capacity to do a lot of things, we just have to prioritize what direction you want us to go. And if we can do that at September 16th, that would be phenomenal. If we can do it in October, I'd take that too.
So I say, I commit to making a decision by October at the latest. What Tom said, you were talking about the different projects and that, and I just wanna go back to some of the emails we've gotten. The first, I heard early childhood from your mouth just for the first time tonight, and I've been wanting to say something for a while, but it's hard sometimes. But we have gotten a lot, not a lot, but a few emails, and we have our early childhood folks here every meeting, and we see you and we appreciate you. But those are things we also have to be remembering too in all this, and someone said it really great in an email, Perry is super important. We all know we have to make that decision, we know we have to, September, October, whatever, but other things are important too, and I just wanna make sure that you guys know, we're still thinking about those things. I know we haven't been talking about them, but absolutely they're in my mind, and I've gotten your preschool emails, appreciate you all, and we haven't forgotten, I promise you that, so I just wanted to say that.
Is there any information that anyone would like staff to bring us at the September meeting that you don't currently have?
I think for me, in a prior, not the 18 million, I mean, not the 18 million or 19 million that we had to do for like the roof and the AC or the HVAC.
The 23 million,
Yeah,
is that what you mean? Okay,
yeah,
yep.
something, it was close, close.
Oh, yeah, no, I just wanna make
But the
sure
other
that.
stuff, but the other stuff in that,
Yeah.
the other stuff in that tier that gets us up to the 71.
Yep.
How the administration looks at a prioritization of that too.
Okay, how, but the administration, do you mean the principals?
No, I mean, your.
Our recommendations?
your
Okay, got it.
And then we could discuss the prioritization of that, because we may not be able to do all that. We may be able, we
Yeah.
may not. I mean, one way or the other, but it'd be a good idea to know what the pecking order is as we decide, are we gonna give this
Yeah.
up for that? And that's why I think, like I said before, and I know I've said this before, is when we did that ESSER funding, it just drove me nuts when we left 1.8 million in debt. And then we said, well, we never really deficit spend that much anyway, that's just an artificial number, which I get, I don't dispute that. But then we come back and start adding stuff back all the time. That's why I think it's nice to have a priority list, so we know what the order is before we get in a position like that.
Yep, I think we can definitely do that.
I'm unclear on what that chunk is that we're talking about that we want a priority list on. Is that in the facility
I-
needs assessment?
I think he means in the initial scope, so on that last page of the initial scope, is this right?
Right.
So we know we have prioritized the 23 million in the facility needs, and then those
Tell
other
me what
projects.
slide we're on
Oh,
here.
no, not those,
These?
no.
It's from the board update.
So the board
It's
update.
from, I pulled it up from the.
So
board.
it's, and I don't have a hard
That's
copy
fine,
of it
that's
with
okay.
me, but it's in the, last regular board meeting.
Okay.
It's the attachment in the last regular board meeting. It's got the tiers across the top.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last page, page 4, somebody had it, somebody
I
held
just
it up.
showed it, I gave, the one I gave
Yeah,
you.
it was in the board update.
The last
So,
page,
yeah, I just wanna make sure I'm
So
looking
it
at the
looks
right
like
data.
this.
yep,
So it is down
That's a nice one.
here.
yep.
Nope, that's not the last page, though.
Yep.
We're looking
That's
at
it.
this
Yeah,
one.
there's this one behind it, sorry.
And then if you scroll down to the
Right.
last one,
Sure.
this is,
No, yours
I
is
think what they are wanting is this
This group,
spelled out in
the
terms
other
of the
things that went
administrative
on to the final
recommendations.
page with,
So the projects
That's
that
the
are
one we're talking
included
about.
with the.
That's
the
the
one I had in front
71
of
number.
me.
Okay,
I think that's what.
On nice paper.
okay. And
Nice.
there is currently a prioritization of those projects,
Well,
or,
what I think we would do would be to phase them out in terms of timing and what, so we all participated in the master facility plan process and bought into the recommendations that came forward to the board, in terms of that master facilities plan. However, I think we can provide some additional feedback in terms of what the administration thinks is critical in what has been identified in that initial scope.
okay.
I think we can do that. I feel confident that that's something we can share at the September board meeting.
Okay. Anything else anybody would like staff to bring to the September board meeting? I know Mr. Fluker mentioned that maybe the $73 million plan is not what you would want to see coming back. Is there something is there another option you would like staff to provide?
I said I'll speak to that on the 16th.
Okay,
And anyone can reach out to me at any time, and I will be happy to add whatever information you are requesting, so we're as prepared as possible for that September 16th date. I will prepare it and your board update, and we will plan to have it here for you that evening as well.
is there anything further anyone would like to add to the conversation this evening? Alrighty. I need a motion.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you. Now,
So moved.
Is there a second?
I thought you did, second, sorry.
Alright.
he
All
did-
those
he
in
did.
favor say aye.
aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Good night, everyone.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Bob. Did Ann duck out?
Well, she went behind the restroom.
Oh, clearly